In the verdant hills of Vermont, a state known for its picturesque landscapes and small-town charm, a different story was unfolding, one of greed, deception, and the biggest financial crime in the state's history. This is The Money Trail, where we investigate the hidden financial history that impacts us all. Meet Ariel Quiros, a once revered businessman who promised to bring jobs and prosperity to Vermont. He had a grand plan: develop a biotech facility in Newport, a struggling town in need of an economic boost. The project, called ANSI was said to create hundreds of jobs and revitalize the region. Quiros raised millions of dollars from investors, many of them immigrants who were attracted by the promise of green cards through the EB-5 visa program. But in 2016, federal and state regulators dropped a bombshell. They accused Quiros of misappropriating $200 million of the $350 million raised from investors. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged him with orchestrating a Ponzi-like scheme, using money from new investors to pay off earlier investors rather than funding the biotech project as promised. The impact on Vermont was devastating. Not only were the dreams of a biotech boom shattered, but many investors lost their life savings. Some had even mortgaged their homes to invest in ANSI, believing in Quiros' vision and the job opportunities it would bring to the area. As we delve into this case, you will meet the people affected by Quiros' actions, learn about the complex web of financial transactions, and explore how this audacious scheme slipped through the cracks. We will also examine the regulatory landscape that allowed such a situation to occur, and consider what changes need to be made to protect investors and prevent similar financial crimes in the future. Join us on The Money Trail, as we investigate the biggest financial crime in Vermont's history and uncover the trail of money, power, and deceit that left so many people's lives in ruins. The Money Trail continues to unravel a complex web of deceit involving key players at the heart of Vermont's largest financial crime. At the center of this storm is James Tobin, former CEO of Brokerage Agency Inc., a seemingly ordinary man who would later become the mastermind behind a massive Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors out of millions. Tobin's right-hand woman, Linda Conway, BA Inc.'s head of operations, played an integral role in this elaborate scam. Together, they manipulated financial records, fabricated statements, and misappropriated funds to lull investors into a false sense of security while enriching themselves. Meanwhile, the regulatory landscape failed to protect innocent Vermonters. The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, tasked with overseeing brokerage firms like BA Inc., faced accusations of negligence for failing to detect and intervene in Tobin's fraudulent activities despite numerous red flags. Between 2011 and 2016, Tobin and his associates at BA Inc. swindled over $30 million from unsuspecting clients, many of whom were elderly or financially vulnerable individuals seeking safe investments for their retirement years. They used this money to fund luxurious lifestyles, complete with expensive homes, exotic vacations, and even a racehorse stable. As the investigation deepens, we uncover more about how these criminals exploited gaps in our financial regulatory system. Our team has obtained confidential documents revealing that FINRA inspectors identified discrepancies during routine examinations of BA Inc.'s books, but never followed up on their findings. This allowed Tobin and Conway to continue their scheme unabated, causing immeasurable harm to hard-working Vermonters. In the next segment of The Money Trail, we'll delve further into the questionable practices that enabled this massive fraud, exploring the systemic issues within FINRA and other regulatory bodies that left ordinary citizens vulnerable to financial predators like Tobin. Stay tuned as we expose the shocking details behind Vermont's biggest financial crime and demand accountability for those responsible. In the early 2000s, a quiet revolution was taking place in the sleepy state of Vermont. The weapon of choice? Fraudulent promissory notes, crafted by a man named James Tobin. At first, his scheme appeared as mundane as any Ponzi scheme: lure investors with promises of high returns, then pay off earlier investors using funds from later ones. However, the scope and complexity of Tobin's fraudulent activities would soon dwarf anything Vermont had ever seen. The initial investigation into Tobin's financial dealings began in earnest when the Securities Division of Vermont's Department of Financial Regulation received an anonymous tip in 2008. The whistleblower claimed that something was amiss with James Tobin and his company, National Note of Vermont. This tip opened the proverbial Pandora's box, revealing a tangled web of deceit spanning nearly 2 decades and involving hundreds of millions of dollars. As investigators began to sift through the financial records of National Note of Vermont, they discovered that Tobin had been issuing fraudulent promissory notes to thousands of investors across the country. These notes, often marketed as low-risk investments backed by real estate, promised returns as high as 12%. However, investigators soon found that these notes were nothing more than empty promises, with little to no actual assets behind them. The scale of Tobin's fraud was staggering. Between 1990 and 2008, he had raised over $375 million from approximately 3,400 investors. Yet, despite these impressive numbers, Tobin managed to keep his scheme hidden in plain sight by creating the illusion of a successful business. He even went so far as to produce falsified financial statements and auditor reports, further convincing his victims that their investments were safe and secure. As the investigation into National Note of Vermont deepened, it became clear that Tobin's fraud extended beyond mere promissory notes. In fact, He had also been orchestrating a complex real estate investment scheme, using investor funds to purchase properties at inflated prices from companies he secretly controlled. These properties were then sold to unsuspecting buyers, often for substantial profits. With each new revelation, the scope and audacity of Tobin's fraud became more apparent. Yet, despite these early successes in uncovering his scheme, it would take years before justice could be served and the full extent of his crimes exposed. And as we will see in the next segment of The Money Trail, this delay was due in large part to systemic failures within FINRA and other regulatory bodies that left ordinary citizens vulnerable to financial predators like Tobin. Stay tuned as we continue our journey down the rabbit hole of Vermont's biggest financial crime and demand accountability for those responsible. As we delve deeper into the biggest financial crime in Vermont's history, it's crucial to understand how the perpetrator, Tobin, executed his elaborate scheme. The story begins in 2015 when Tobin, a financial advisor at Montpelier-based Green Mountain Financial, started persuading his clients to invest in a fictitious hedge fund. Tobin's modus operandi was a textbook example of affinity fraud, a type of investment scam that targets members of an identifiable group, often sharing a common interest, religion, or ethnicity with the fraudster. In Tobin's case, his victims were primarily longtime clients and friends from his church community. In order to gain their trust, Tobin presented himself as a knowledgeable and successful financial advisor. He claimed that he had access to exclusive investment opportunities, which could yield returns significantly higher than those of traditional investments. In reality, these opportunities were non-existent, and the funds his clients entrusted him with never left his personal bank account at TD Bank. Tobin's scheme began to unravel in 2018 when one of his victims, after growing suspicious, contacted state authorities. The Vermont Department of Financial Regulation initiated an investigation and discovered that Tobin had stolen over $3 million from more than 24 investors. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Tobin attempted to obstruct the DFR's inquiry by providing falsified records and lying about his actions during interviews with investigators. This obstruction led to further charges and increased the severity of his sentence. The magnitude of Tobin's financial crime is not only due to the sheer amount he embezzled, but also because of the systemic failures within regulatory bodies like FINRA, which left ordinary citizens vulnerable to such predators. As we continue our journey down the money trail, we will explore these regulatory shortcomings and demand accountability for those responsible. In the next segment, we will discuss the impact of Tobin's crimes on his victims, their families, and the broader community. We will also examine the emotional and financial consequences of affinity fraud and how it can be prevented in the future. Stay tuned. As we delve deeper into the money trail, it's crucial to examine the financial consequences of the biggest financial crime in Vermont history. Committed by convicted fraudster Michael Tobin, this crime left a trail of destruction that affected not only individuals and businesses, but also the state's overall economy. Tobin's elaborate Ponzi scheme defrauded over 90 investors, primarily from Vermont and New Hampshire, between 2011 and 2015. He promised his victims extraordinary returns through his company, Excel Secure Investments. However, instead of investing their money wisely, Tobin used the funds to finance his luxurious lifestyle, including purchasing a $1 million vacation home in Stowe, Vermont. When Tobin's house of cards collapsed, he had swindled more than $20 million from hardworking people and businesses. Many victims lost their life savings, retirement funds, and college tuition money for their children. The average loss per investor was approximately $230,000, a staggering amount that has left many families struggling to make ends meet. The financial consequences extended beyond the individual investors. Businesses that had invested with Tobin were also crippled by his deceit. With their funds tied up in Tobin's scheme, these businesses faced severe cash flow issues, forcing some to lay off employees or even shut down entirely. The ripple effect of Tobin's crimes damaged the local economy and shattered trust within the community. Moreover, Vermont's Department of Financial Regulation reported that they had received over $10 million in claims from defrauded investors as of February 2023. The DFR has been working diligently to recover funds for the victims. However, the process is slow and complicated, leaving many victims still waiting for their money years after Tobin's arrest. The emotional and financial consequences of affinity fraud, such as that committed by Tobin, cannot be understated. To prevent similar crimes in the future, investors must remain vigilant and do their due diligence before investing their hard-earned money. Regulatory bodies also need to strengthen their oversight and ensure that perpetrators like Tobin are held accountable for their actions. In our next segment, we will discuss the impact of Tobin's crimes on his victims, their families, and the broader community. We will explore the emotional scars left by affinity fraud and share some prevention strategies to protect yourself from becoming a victim in the future. Stay tuned for The Money Trail. The legal proceedings against James Tobin, the mastermind behind what is considered the biggest financial crime in Vermont history, were long and complex. In June 2017, after a lengthy investigation, Tobin was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Each count carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. In March 2018, Tobin pleaded guilty to all charges in a Vermont courtroom. The plea deal saw him admitting to misappropriating over $36 million from his clients, including elderly residents of the state. This amount is staggering, and it's a painful reminder of how one person can cause so much harm to so many people. The sentencing hearing took place in July 2018. Judge Christina Rice presided over the case, and she made it clear that Tobin's actions had severe consequences for his victims. In a powerful statement, she said, "Your conduct has shattered lives and destroyed trust." The judge then handed down a sentence of 10 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and ordered him to pay $36,947,208.15 in restitution. While the sentencing brought some measure of justice for Tobin's victims, it cannot erase the pain and suffering he caused. The emotional scars from affinity fraud run deep, and many of his victims are still grappling with the financial and emotional fallout. Tobin's crimes serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed and the importance of regulatory oversight. It highlights the need for investors to remain vigilant and ensure that perpetrators like Tobin are held accountable for their actions. In our next segment, we will discuss the impact of Tobin's crimes on his victims, their families, and the broader community. We will explore the emotional scars left by affinity fraud and share some prevention strategies to protect yourself from becoming a victim in the future. Stay tuned for The Money Trail. As we delve deeper into the biggest financial crime in Vermont's history, it's crucial to examine the current status of the victims and the pursuit of restitution. Over 100 investors, many of them elderly and vulnerable, lost their life savings, a staggering total of nearly $30 million. The impact on these individuals and their families has been catastrophic, shattering their dreams of a secure retirement and leaving behind emotional scars that may never fully heal. Take, for instance, the story of Eleanor, an 82-year-old widow who invested her life savings with Tobin. She had planned to leave a modest inheritance for her grandchildren, but now finds herself struggling to make ends meet. Or consider George, a retired schoolteacher who had hoped to travel and enjoy his golden years. Instead, he was forced to return to work part-time, trying to rebuild his shattered finances. The legal proceedings against Tobin have been ongoing for several years now, with victims and their families anxiously awaiting some form of restitution. However, the road to justice is often long and arduous. In 2019, Tobin was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but this provides little solace for those still grappling with the financial consequences of his actions. Restitution, when ordered, rarely covers the full amount lost by victims. According to data from the U.S. Sentencing Commission, the average restitution order in investment fraud cases is just 25% of the total loss. This means that even if Tobin were to pay every penny he owes, it would still fall short of what his victims truly deserve. In response to this devastating crime, various organizations have rallied to provide support and resources for the victims. The Vermont Department of Financial Regulation has taken steps to educate investors on how to avoid falling prey to affinity fraud, while local nonprofits have offered counseling services to help victims cope with the emotional aftermath. Yet despite these efforts, many victims continue to feel the weight of Tobin's crimes each day. As they struggle to rebuild their lives, we must remember that behind every statistic lies a personal story of loss and resilience. In our next segment, we will explore these emotional scars further and discuss strategies for protecting yourself from becoming a victim in the future. Until then, this is The Money Trail. The Money Trail has traced the biggest financial crime in Vermont's history, leaving us with the critical question: how do we prevent such incidents from happening again? The devastating impact of James Tobin's Ponzi scheme serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and regulation. In the aftermath of this colossal scam, Vermont's Department of Financial Regulation has implemented several measures to safeguard citizens. One such initiative is the creation of an Investor Protection Center, offering free resources and education on smart investing practices. The DFR also now requires investment advisors to disclose any disciplinary actions against them, ensuring transparency for potential clients. Moreover, Vermont's legislature passed stricter laws regarding securities fraud, increasing penalties for offenders. This change sends a clear message that financial crimes will not be tolerated. However, these measures can only do so much. Personal responsibility remains paramount. Investors must remain skeptical and diligent when presented with lucrative opportunities. Always verify credentials, research track records, and seek independent advice before making significant financial decisions. It's also essential to report suspicious activities or individuals. In Tobin's case, early warnings might have prevented the loss of millions. By speaking up, we can help protect not only ourselves but also those around us. Remember, it was ordinary Vermonters who suffered most in this tragedy. They lost homes, retirements, and dreams because they trusted the wrong person. Their stories serve as a cautionary tale, reminding us that financial security should never be taken for granted. As we conclude our investigation, let us remember that financial literacy is power. Understanding the complexities of finance empowers us to make informed decisions and avoid becoming victims. This is not just about Tobin or Vermont, it's about every investment, every dollar, everywhere. Stay vigilant, stay informed. This has been The Money Trail.